and that this man had come. This man bearing the name of Muhammad ibn Abdullah, coming from the family of Quraysh, from the household of Ismail, through Nabat and Qaydar. The lineage was correct, the prophecies were correct. He had been born at the time that had been stipulated. He was the one. And he came bringing messages of a holy Lord. Some people coming out of his presence saying, Quddusun, Quddusun, holy are you, Lord, holy are you. Bringing out the message of holiness. Salvation by faith alone, which comes through the mercy of Allah, in which He has promised those who believe will have paradise, where His justice and His righteousness will be everlasting. And those that reject faith shall be punished for all eternity in a fire that shall never end, and where His wrath shall abide for all eternity. This was the message. Az-Zubair asked for more information. What has he commanded them against? And he received the news. You are to reject idolatry. You are to have good dealings with your parents, whether they're believers or not. You are not to take usury. You are not to fornicate. You are not to take intoxicants. You are to take care of those who are lesser and weaker than you. You must not prey on others who are lesser than you and bully them and cheat people. Az-Zubair believed and said the words of faith, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. It would not be something difficult because Az-Zubair had already seen people around him that were Muslim. Talha was. His mother, Sophia bint Abd al-Muttalib, was Muslim, being the aunt of the Prophet. His father. But he had been on the fringes. Now he was inside of the faith. He had met the Prophet ﷺ, and this 15-year-old said that he was prepared to dedicate all of his time, whatever he was asked to do. And he did so. He suffered the early persecutions. When the unbelievers said, we shall not trade with the Muslims or buy or sell with them, he was one of the first Muslims out of severe hunger to boil the leather on his shoes and eat them. Because he was so hungry and the food was so scarce, he boiled the leather on his shoes and ate them. He and Talha and some of the other early Muslims used to go and dig in the garbage around Mecca and eat what was in there. So people who hadn't properly finished a melon or people who had left some food, they would dig through the garbage and eat that. And it's interesting to note that sometimes when Az-Zubair would find things, if he found it first and Talha hadn't found it, he would pass the putrefying, molded food to Talha. Even in starvation, Talha remained his best friend. And it's from this that we learned that Az-Zubair was what we call selfless. Not selfish, selfless. In which even in that situation, he would help. When the torture became so severe, you had Muslims that were crucified, Muslims that were tortured to death, and when they crucified them, they would crucify you naked. Muslims that were tortured to death, Muslims that were beaten to death. The time finally came where the Prophet ﷺ gave permission for some of the Muslims to go to Habasha or Ethiopia. And the Muslims slowly began to file out, the weakest among them, out of Mecca on boats, headed to Ethiopia. Az-Zubair, he by this time had married the eldest daughter of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Her name was Asma bint Abi Bakr. He had married her. So here he is, a young man in his teenage years, 16, 17. He didn't wait till he was finished in university or college. Once he had paid back his student loans, his parents said, this is not the right time, you're only 16. You're only 17. You've still got your college loans. Besides, she's not from our clan. She's not from our group. She speaks Arabic with a different accent to us. No, that wasn't stated. they were married. And it's a warning to the youth today. We can't ignore it, that we have some people that mature faster than others. If you enjoy, there's no harm in enjoying the company of women. That is not blameworthy. What would be blameworthy is to act on that and do so outside of marriage. There's no harm in loving a woman and wanting to spend the rest of your life with a woman, as long as it's married and within Allah's holy precincts. That's not impermissible. What's impermissible is to act on those feelings when you're not in a sacramental relationship with Allah or He's declared holy. That's the problem. So with his new wife, he and some of the other Muslims head to Ethiopia. Some years later, because he'd been watching Jafar ibn Abi Talib, who was sent as the scholar in charge of them. So Az-Zubair studied with them. Az-Zubair, after a period of years, came back from Ethiopia and was back in Mecca with the Muslims, after their situation was a little bit better and the boycott of the Muslims had been called off. Az-Zubair now was coming into scholarship in his own right and was extremely knowledgeable in the different aspects of recitation of the Quran, fiqh, and other affairs. When the time came when persecution of Muslims again shot up, he was one of the first to be allowed to immigrate to Medina, which at that time was referred to as Yathrib. His wife, Asma bint Abi Bakr, was pregnant at this time. And their son, Abdullah ibn Az-Zubair, was the first Muslim to have been born in Medina from Muslims. There was an interesting incident that occurred in Az-Zubair ibn Al-Awwam's life. He was at home and he would be in charge of chopping wood and preparing the house for firewood and other things like that. So he would make kindling, he would chop wood, he would prepare the meat, he would skin the animals and prepare the food for cooking. His wife, Asma bint Abi Bakr, would go to the well and bring water back. And she would take the pail and place it on her head and walk all the way back. But it was a long journey. And so one day the Prophet ﷺ came riding by on his camel, and he saw her walking with great difficulty with the pail. And he said to her, "Would you like a ride back to your house?" And she thought for a moment and then remembered Az-Zubair about how protective he was over her, and she said, "No, I'm fine." So the Prophet ﷺ rode on. Now what we learn from that incident is an issue that has some divide among the scholars about, are Muslim women riding in public transportation? You'll find a good portion of the fuqaha are of the position, and they use this as evidence, that women riding on buses or cabs or planes or anything like that, as long as they're not in a situation where they're compartmentalized and can't emerge from that place in emergencies, is perfectly permitted for them to do so. When Asma bint Abi Bakr came back, she informed her husband of the situation. Said, "I was worried in case you might be jealous." And Az-Zubair said, "How could I be jealous of the Prophet ﷺ? It would have been better if you rode on the camel with all the difficulties that you had, than walk back spilling the water and have to go back and fill it up again." So we learn from this that Az-Zubair ibn Al-Awwam was also different to some of the people in his time. Az-Zubair's knowledge was great. He had already made 2 immigrations. He's one of the people that is called Sahibul Hijratain, one of the people who made hijrah twice. Not every of the companions had made hijrah twice. Some of them had only done hijrah once. He had been to Ethiopia and back, and then he'd also been from Mecca to Medina. So he had a prized position. He had been in the Battle of Badr, and when the time came for the Battle of Uhud, with his best friend Talha ibn Ubaydullah, he went with him. In the Battle of Uhud, the 50 archers had been told by the Prophet ﷺ to stay on the hill. Do not come down from the hillock.